Hi, this is the first interview in the Leakey Foundation's Oral History Project, and I'm at the Natural History Museum in DC with Kay Behrensmeyer. Kay, you and I have known each other for a long time, so we're not going to fake that we don't. Could you, just for the record, give us your full name and your current position and the name and the location of the institution?
Yes, my full name is a very long German name, Anna Catherine Behrensmeyer, and my parents started calling me Kay right off the bat. So that's what I am today.
Okay.
I'm a research curator of the Department of Paleobiology here at the National Museum of Natural History. I've been here 42 years almost now. I'm also curator in charge of the Neogene and Quaternary vertebrate fossils in the department. And we're in Washington, D.C., where the National Museum is part of the Smithsonian Institution.
Thank you very much. Could you tell us something about the family that you started to tell us about? What was your, where did you live as a child? Did you have brothers and sisters? Where did you grow up?
I grew up in western Illinois in a town called Quincy, about 40,000 people. I had two younger brothers. My father was an architect and very interested in science. My mother was very interested in science as well, and politics and literature. And the family had been in Quincy for several generations, so lots of people there that supported my early interest in science. And we also used to go to a farm about 13 miles from the city, where my grandfather, my mother's father, had purchased land and had horses. We weren't farmers, or he wasn't, but he was a lawyer. And so we would go out there, and there were fossils to look for, there were snakes, there were all kinds of wonderful natural history experiences from the time we were little. And my mother had horses and ponies for us, and so we spent a lot of time, actually, my brothers and I, looking for fossils in the creek, riding our ponies down there. And just, it began a great interest for all three of us in natural science.
So your father went to college, your mother went to college?
Yes, my mother did not finish college because of the Depression, but she wanted to be a journalist.
Okay. And where did you go to school?
I went first to a junior college near St. Louis called Monticello Junior College. Then I went to Washington University in St. Louis and got my undergraduate degree in geology.
Okay.
And after that, I went to Harvard. I got in as a graduate student on a National Defense Education Act grant, which was wonderful. And I didn't know really what I wanted to do, except that I had this geological background. I'd been reading National Geographics and books and all kinds of things about human evolution and paleontology, and I'd had some great courses in paleo. So when I arrived there, it wasn't like I had already picked out a project to do.
But to go back to WashU, why did you decide on WashU, and why do you think they decided on you?
Well, I had a wonderful geology course when I was at the junior college.
Okay.
And then I thought I was going to be an artist, actually. That was my main interest when I was growing up, along with science. And my father encouraged that. He tragically passed away when I was age 14. And because he was so interested in science, I think that actually helped to propel me into doing that as well.
Oh, that's interesting.
So, but I thought I was going to be an artist, but Washington University didn't have much of a program in fine arts, and they did have a great program in geology, so I
And were you a good scholar?
A good scholar?
When you were in high school?
Oh, yes. I actually graduated a year early. And that's why my mother thought I wasn't ready for the big time.
Oh, so that's why you went to junior college?
Yeah.
Oh, I see.
And I had a little scholarship there. I mean, since my father passed away, and she had to raise 3 kids and get us all, out into the world. It was.
And so when you went to Harvard, you applied to work with a particular individual?
I didn't. No. And Brian Patterson, who was there and who had been working in East Africa, took me on as his graduate student. And I don't really know the history behind that, but...
what was the PhD program?
It was in the Department of Geosciences.
Okay.
But he was a vertebrate paleontologist.
Right.
Al Romer was there, famous vertebrate paleontologist. Ernst Mayr was there, evolutionary biologist. They had a really strong program that included paleontology at the time, and Steve Gould actually was there, came in the same year I did.
Okay. And what was the balance of males and females in the class?
I was the only female
you were the only
grad
female.
student in my entry year, and then there were 1 or 2 others that came along, but basically very few role models of that kind, of that gender, and yet, I mean, Brian Patterson gave me every opportunity, and including, the opportunity to start work in East Africa, and his interest in human evolution too.
I only met him a couple of times, but he seemed to me to be an extremely, sort of the uncle that you would wish that you'd had. He seemed to be a very decent, warm, smart guy.
Very smart. He had worked his way up without getting a legitimate college degree to be the Agassiz professor, and you could do that in those days. I mean, there's a long story there, but I won't get into it. It'll take the rest of the time if I try to. But he also was very hands-off. I mean, I learned more from the other graduate students that he had around him directly. But I found out later that when I was, kind of a different sort of graduate student, and there was some bias against women as well, that he defended me and helped where.
So he helped behind the scenes.
He definitely helped behind the scenes, and I remember one time I needed a letter of recommendation for something, and he told me he'd written a letter that would get me into heaven. He had that kind of humor, and everybody loved Pat. I mean, he had a wonderful sense of humor. But he was not a hands-on details kind of person for his students, and so we all kind of banded together, and he had classes at his home, and he made us feel like a community and passed on a lot of knowledge. But at the time when I entered graduate school, he had decided he would not ever work in East Africa again because he had fallen out with Louis Leakey over the deposits and the fossils from the Turkana Basin.
Okay, so he joined a long list of people who... And what was the topic of your PhD?
When I'll step back a little bit because I was coming in from geology, but I was very interested in paleontology, and I became interested in human evolution because I took a course from William Howells, who was there at the time, and there was just this ferment of discovery post Olduvai and the Leakeys finding things in East Africa, and so it was a hot topic at the time, and so in my very first committee meeting with Al Romer, Brian Patterson, Steve Gould, Ray Seaver, who was a sedimentologist, and maybe some other people. I was sitting there, and they said, well, what would you like to do? And I said, well, I would like to be interdisciplinary.
Right.
And they looked at me, like, okay, you have these ideals, but I was told that I had to specialize. If I was going to be in vertebrate paleontology, I would have to find a group, a kind of animal to work on, and, narrow my focus. And I was a little put off by that, but, here were these luminaries in the field, so I couldn't
Behrensmeyer
really
and Aroma tells you, you've got to... Yeah.
I'm not sure which one of them told me that. So, but I just didn't take that advice, basically, even though, looking back on it, I was rather forthright of me, I guess you could say, or maybe even a little arrogant, but I wanted to figure out what was happening with the context of the fossil record.
So you were more interested in process than in the
objects.
The object.
Right. Okay. And from my field work I was in a field camp in Montana, and I'd gotten very, very interested at the geological side of things, but then I wanted to see how the fossils related to that. And so it seemed like fertile ground to take that into the world of human evolution and figure out how the human fossil remains and their ancestors related to the environments and the rocks that represented those environments. So that's what my thesis topic ended up being, although...
what was it called?
The taphonomy and paleoecology of the Lake Turkana now, but it was Lake Rudolph at the time, fossil record.
So you went up to Turkana as a graduate student?
Well, I first went to Lothicum Hill with Vince Maglio, who was a more senior graduate student with Brian Patterson. He was studying elephant evolution. And this mandible, I've just got a cast of it, this little hominid mandible with one tooth presented a lot of problems and enigmas because there just wasn't quite enough to say what hominin it was, especially at that time. And the age was a problem.
Nobody really believed there were hominins at that time. So,
right. Well, this was initially... Brian Patterson had been working in what he thought were Miocene deposits, and then they turned out to be Pliocene deposits, which were later in time and getting closer to the story of human evolution as it was known then. This was in the late 60s. And so this mandible he found, Brian Patterson did, at Lothicum Hill, which is southwest of Lake Turkana. And this was partly what led to the falling out with Louis Leakey, along with some other fossils from a place called Canopoi. And so Patterson was very lucky in finding these. And there were lots of other fossil animals as well. So his grad student, Vince Maglio, needed to go back to Lothicum, and Patterson wanted me to go back to look into more of the geology and the dating, because they didn't really have the stratigraphy settled, and they, in those days, potassium argon dating was in a fairly early state as well. So I had to raise money myself, some of my own personal money, to go over that first time. And Vince and I went with two crew members, and we spent 5 weeks at Lothicum in the fall of 1968. I met Richard Leakey at that point.
So you were in Lothicum when I was in East Rudolph, as was. Well, I never.
These are fun discoveries, aren't they?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I was over there, and it was a real adventure, because the local people there, the Turkana, had not really seen white people and researchers of any kind, and they were very curious. And it was hot, and it was buggy, and it was a windswept desert with these amazing outcrops with fossils in them. So I did a geological map, and figured out the stratigraphy, and we collected a lot more fossils. And I met Richard after that, and he asked me right away, I don't know, he must have talked to Vince or someone, if I would be interested in joining his project the next year.
And at that time, Vince was already the elephant president?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, he was well along.
Okay.
And he was a very important mentor He taught comparative anatomy that I took as a TA, and you know, he was already doing this work, and I had not collected vertebrate fossils or doing that. I didn't know anything about that. So
that was the Vince part.
Yeah.
And then when did you defend your thesis?
1973.
Oh, so right.
And during that time, you know, Vince helped me and other people helped me, and Richard Leakey really helped as well. He provided so many opportunities for me, and he asked lots of hard questions too. And he was skeptical about this, you know, idea of taphonomy and how things become fossil, and then all the biases that I was trying to figure out. But I set up this way of collecting where it was, you collected everything, not just the things you were interested in, by laying out squares, which you helped with. Yes, the 10 by 10 meter squares.
Oh, God, the 10 by 10 meter squares.
And the outcrops, you know, along particular strata, so you could be sure of some control.
Even if the square was under a wait-a-bit tree.
Yeah, oh yes.
Yes, okay.
Yeah.
I remember, okay.
Yeah, well.
Okay.
But it was a systematic way of getting a sample that was comparable at different times in different places and different environments. So that helped to show that the fossil vertebrates were actually pretty faithful to the different environments, like a channel deposit versus a lake margin versus a floodplain. And the hominins fit into that as well. We even found some on our squares. And so, yeah. And then, but all the way through that, Patterson was supporting me. None of my advisors ever went out in the field with me. But Glenn Isaac, this wonderful archaeologist who was also multidisciplinary, I was working with him on some of the archaeological sites, and he became my mentor, really.
Okay, but so Richard invited you to go to what was then East Rudolph in 1969. Okay.
Yes.
And that was when you discovered the artifacts?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And tell us about that.
Okay, so Richard actually we had driven up together to Ferguson's Gulf and then taken a boat across, and you know, this was high adventure. And then the tent camp was set up at Kubifora, and we were ranging around in the Turkana area, the East Turkana area.
And so who else was there with you in 1969?
Paul Abel.
Right.
And his daughter.
Right.
And his grad student. And Meave came up at that point, and Kamoya was there, and the hominid gang, a number of them.
Okay, so it was a pretty small group.
It was. And after they started finding a hominin, it's like 406, the Paranthropus skull, then later in the season, Lewis came up.
Oh, okay.
And visited.
Okay.
And Mary, too, I think.
Yeah.
And that was also the year when we had a camel safari to go. But before that, there weren't roads, so we had to bushwhack with the vehicles. And I had learned to drive on the expedition to Lothringham, so I'm not sure how much driving I was doing. But we were out in an area that I was with Kamoya. He was probably the one who drove to this area, a long way from Kubifora, and walking over the outcrops. And I was interested because there was a light-colored layer in the strata, and I learned that those were probably volcanic ashes and important for dating. And so I walked up on this little plateau and looked around, and there were these strange-looking lava chips and rocks lying on the surface of this eroded tuff. And I had not seen artifacts before like
really?
That. No, but they were not in proper geological context. They were
just lying on the.
They were on. They had eroded
surface.
out of the top or the part of the tuff that was exposed. So I called Kamoya over. He was looking for fossils not far away.
And Kamoya had been working at Olduvai with the Leakeys and with Richard at Natron.
He took a look around,
in the way that he does.
Yeah, he did. And he said, I think Richard will be interested in this. And very understated, as usual. So,
Right.
but, to me, I had the thrill of realizing that this could be an artifact site.
Right.
But I put it together from the standpoint of a geologist.
Right.
And this was not a geological phenomenon that I was looking at. There is no way there could be these lava pieces lying around on this tuff.
In that place.
Unless, with no nearby outcrop
So
of
there wasn't
lava.
a anthropomorphic explanation for that.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I've got the word right, but the word right.
Well,
okay.
It was not within my realm of experience as a geologist or a paleontologist to see something like that. So.
And then Glenn was involved once Richard. So Richard came to look at them.
Yes.
Okay.
And
the big cheese came to look at them.
Yes, he came, and he was very interested, and he thought maybe he'd seen this site when he sat down with his little plane the year before, perhaps. But in any case, he kindly named it after me, and they're Olduvai tradition, so that became the KBS site and the KBS Tuff eventually, and so it has stuck. The Tuff itself, and I was once introduced as the person who was named after the KBS Tuff, just to show you what's really important.
I know, yes.
Anyway.
Yes. Well, one of my first graduate students, I was always introduced as Susan Abbott's advisor. So that was okay. So how were you putting food on the table until 1973? Did you have a stipend? Did you?
I had the grant for. I had a 3-year fellowship to start off my PhD work, and then I was a TA. I actually taught with Steve Gould's undergrad course at Harvard. That was quite an experience. And I was a tutor at North House at Radcliffe for a while too.
Okay.
And just piece things together. And then for the fieldwork, Glenn had grants. Okay. So I was able to.
When did he become involved? Once Richard
1970.
In 1970.
Yeah.
Okay.
And initially, and I even have pictures in the other office about this sort of framed. There was a single trench, a test trench that Richard did.
Right.
And with Camilla and the others. So they could see that things were in situ, not just on the surface. So then he brought in Glenn, who had been working at Orlikasali.
And they had been at Natron. And then you were invited back in 1971?
Oh, yeah, from 1969 right through after I got my PhD, and I just kept going back every summer to work with Glenn and to do my own work too, including documenting all those hominin sites which you helped with as well.
Okay, so this takes us to 1973. You're no longer a graduate student. You have a PhD, and what were your thoughts? What did you want to do? Where did you want to work?
I had the opportunity to go to Berkeley to be with Glenn Isaac on a Miller Fellowship for 2 years. So that was wonderful. That solved the problem of the first part of the post-PhD. And I just wanted to keep doing the research. I didn't somehow feel the pressure to immediately jump into an academic job. I always thought I would get an academic job, but there were just so many other things going on, and the opportunities to go back to Kenya and keep discovering new things about human evolution, which it was a glorious time.
It was just it was just like it was the FAO Schwartz of I mean, you put your hand in the jar and something comes out. I mean, not just fossils, but, what do they all mean in the environment? I mean, it was a very interesting time, largely driven by Glynn, but I think Richard had...
Oh, Richard,
Richard, knew what was going on. He realized that it wasn't just fossils. You had to do all the other things.
Well, the dating, too.
Yes.
I mean, the whole controversy about the dating that, and bringing in the people who were supposed to be experts. And
then discovering that they weren't quite as expert as everybody thought.
Well, but also the people. I mean, there were egos, for sure. But so many of these folks were also just so curious and so driven by the need to know more, and that's what I
would you single out other than Richard and Glynn for that?
Oh my! Well, I mean, Paul Abel was a great person for that.
He was a geochemist who sort of stumbled into Richard's orbit and had gone to Bringo, I think, to excavate the elephant. And I mean, he was an interesting guy. Yeah,
and his grad student Don Siegel was really interested in things, and his daughter, he was too young to be professional, but she, all of us just talked about things constantly, and Richard would kind of at dinner,
I remember. I mean, it was just like a sort of a seminar every night.
He would bait people, with, well, how do you really know that? And he could ask the hard questions, and sometimes people would get offended by that because, like, what does this guy know? He doesn't have a PhD like I do, or whatever. But he was very supportive, I would say, of my sort of non-traditional interdisciplinary approach to things, and and when my own my committee back at Harvard was very skeptical, and it wasn't until the very last. Like my defense, that I was sure they were going to accept my thesis.
Okay, because I
was kind of
you hadn't taken their advice,
right?
Okay.
I hadn't, but Patterson again was supportive of that. But then I had the Miller Fellowship, and then I got into another project in Pakistan with David Pilbeam.
Right, and how did that come about?
In 1974, I invited my friend and colleague from Harvard, Catherine Badgley, to go with me to Kenya.
Right.
And she was a grad student at Yale at that point, and was involved with the Pakistan project. And so then she suggested that I come out to Pakistan. And
so you were going to both places?
Mm-hmm. And then Baringo. Okay. There was a Baringo project.
Okay, with Andrew Hill.
With Andrew and David. I mean, David got that started too. So
back to my prosaic question about who was. And so, when did you get a job, as opposed to a fellowship?
I applied for 2 jobs in my life. One was at the University of Wyoming, because I really loved Wyoming and the freedom feeling of being out there. And I didn't get that job. But then I was interested in talking with paleoarchaeologists whose name is Gary Haynes, who was doing North American archaeology, but he was also doing taphonomy. So I came down here to talk to him because he was a grad student here in D.C. and walked into the prep lab in this department, and one of the people who was hanging out there said, "Oh, we have a job opening. You should apply for it." And otherwise, I wouldn't have even known about this job. I thought, well, a museum job would be terrific. Okay. But there was fortunately just enough time, so I got my application in.
Okay.
And
when was that?
The fall of 1980.
Okay, so you were a Rolling Stone
for 7 years.
For 7 years.
Yeah, of glorious postdoctoral work. And at one point, I didn't have I taught at UC Santa Cruz for 2 years as well. I forgot about putting that in. And that was on the
What was
quarter
that
system.
connection?
Well, Leo Laporte invited me to do that because I had met him. He was interested in paleoecology, so marine paleoecology mainly. But
Okay.
so I taught there. But then there were quarters when I wasn't teaching, and then I just went to Kenya to live because it was a lot cheaper.
Okay.
And
And you lived where in those apartments by the museum?
partly, well, actually, I lived at Syokimau Farm outside of Nairobi by the airport for a while.
Okay.
It was an enclave of ecologists. So
That's how you got into the ecology scene in Kenya.
partly, but I was at Berkeley, and David Western walked into my office because of connections through other folks who knew him, and he had his thesis under his arm, and I had been looking for a modern ecosystem where I could study taphonomic processes at work on vertebrate bones. So,
And this was Amboseli.
yeah, so he had completed his PhD, I think the same year I did, on the ecology of Amboseli, and he'd been recommended to walk into my office because I was looking for a place to study bones, and so
you were looking for a modern situation where you could observe the beginnings of the fossilization process,
Right.
and you were also working in places where you were observing
right.
the recovery of the fossils.
Right, both
Okay.
ends.
Okay.
Yes, but the unknowns at that time were what does get into the fossil record,
Okay.
and why.
Why? Okay.
And what are the processes that filter the little bit of information that does get preserved? What does that information represent in terms of
Okay.
the reality of those past times?
Okay.
And that's one of the big questions still
Phil. Okay.
for human remains and all the other organic remains that come down to us.
Okay. Well, the next group of questions are about career, but yours is very easy because you've only had one job. So employment is not that interesting. But what sort of contribution do you think it's made to your scientific career that you have not moved around?
Oh, interesting question. I had an opportunity to leave in the early 80s and go out to the University of Arizona. They courted me. It was a target of opportunity. I had lots of colleagues out there. Arizona is a great place for geology and paleontology. But I decided to stay here, partly because there were negotiations, and the administration at the time offered me enough money to start the Evolution of Terrestrial Ecosystems program. And
So was that an attempt to try and keep you?
yes. And plus, a number of my friends and colleagues from graduate school and postgraduate were already here, like Scott Wing and Rick Potts had come in, and so I thought, well, this is just too good to leave, and so I guess if I had moved, I would have had a very different set of demands on my time.
Right.
The usual kind of academic demands. Here, people don't leave because you're basically given free rein if you're a curator to chart your own research course.
So
Yeah.
who is the equivalent of the head of department who's breathing down your neck and wanting an annual report and interested in how much grant money you've raised? And
we have
what
performance
papers?
plans,
Right,
and
right.
we are supposed to publish 3 papers a year.
Oh, really?
Peer reviewed.
You have a requirement?
Oh, absolutely. No,
Oh.
it's actually pretty stringent.
Okay.
And so you have to measure up to that. There are a whole list of things now on our performance review, and I'm a senior scientist, so the bar is set even higher.
Okay.
And I have to contribute to the community, raise funds, take students, mentees, people that I can help do community service within the museum, without outside. No, it's but it is diversified. It's not just teaching, and exhibit work is also very important.
Yes, well, we may come back to that because I know that's been a big part of your recent life.
That's our education.
So in terms of major influences on your career, I think we've sort of touched on Brian Patterson, Richard Leakey, Glenn Isaac. Vince Maglio was an influence, but maybe because he and I sort of switched. I moved from medicine to paleoanthropology, and he moved from paleontology to medicine at more or less the same time. So who else?
Well, if you're talking about people who are still around, certainly.
Well, anybody.
Catherine Badgley has been a wonderful partner in thinking about the fossil record, about paleoecology, and we just, when we get together, we're constantly trading ideas, and so I owe her a lot, and other women who initially I didn't have women to talk to, so she was an undergrad when I was at Harvard, but we just hit it off, and we remain very, very close colleagues. And she's gone more into paleoecology and North American, but quite diverse as well. But she knows taphonomy as well, and so we're co-writing a number of chapters for a book and on the Sawaliks in Pakistan. So, but also I was thinking about this in terms of people who are no longer around. Bill Bishop was an important influence early on. He was very supportive.
And you met him because he was going to Kenya working on the Miocene project.
Right, but also I went on a INQA conference to New Zealand where he was holding forth as well and talking about the geology, and he was just such an inclusive individual.
He was an interesting, larger-than-life sort of person.
Yeah.
Did he sing at the INQA conference?
He did.
He did.
In a cave. Gilbert and Sullivan.
Gilbert and Sullivan.
So
it's always Gilbert and Sullivan.
But he also showed, and this is true of Catherine too, the fun of science.
Right.
I'm a fairly naturally serious person, and being around people who just would delight in what was going on, and it is fun, and you shouldn't have your nose to the grindstone so much that you don't see that and share it with others. So Bill definitely did that. But then also Mary Leakey, I met her at Olduvai in 1969. Lewis drove down with Sue Abel and me to take the news to Mary about all the new finds, and then she was just, she's a gruff individual, but she didn't scare me. She was,
she didn't.
If you weren't scared of her, then that was a way to connect, and eventually I went to Laetoli as well, and just as a visitor, but we encountered each other periodically, but to know that she had been such a wonderful influence and figure in the whole discovery of early human evolution and behavior. To another woman who was self-made, really, and so bright, so perceptive, and so careful about her work, too.
Yes, extremely careful. And so one of the questions is, how were you mentored, and how did that experience affect your own mentoring philosophy? How do you go about mentoring the pre-docs and the post-docs?
By asking questions and by making sure they understand the value of communication and informing me about what they're they're doing.
And you meet with them
Not
regularly?
Not on a. How I meet for them is around this table
Right,
for lunch.
yes, okay.
And we trade store, or we go out for a beer, or in the cases where I can take them to the field, I do that. And the best experiences really for mentoring are in the field, where you're seeing each other under different conditions, and you're asking different questions, and you're pointing out things, and then you can get an idea about where a fossil should be and actually test it by looking for that fossil. And then if it's not there, you have to explain that. So, but I think it's more the style of Glenn Isaac than Brian Patterson. I think people need guidance, and if they're really independent-minded, they go and do what they want to do, like I did. Mm-hmm. But mostly they're appreciative, and we establish a good relationship, and then that carries on. And the whole ETE, or Evolution of Terrestrial Ecosystems group, that I helped to mentor along with Kate Lyons and the ecologist Nick Gotelli, those young people are out with jobs now after about 7 years of constant kind of interaction and meetings. Right. There are a good number of young women. We diversified, and we're able to support, and almost all of them have good jobs now.
So what was the next question is, what was the most important advice you were given at the start of your career? We know the advice you ignored.
Yes.
Do you think the advice that you ignored was the most important advice you were?
I was thinking about this. In a way it was, but also I was warned by my sedimentologist advisor not to let myself get taken over by the paleoanthropologists who needed geology, needed the dating, needed the stratigraphy, needed the context as, a support for their fossils, their fossil hominins, that
they wanted to know the context.
Yeah, they at least needed to know how old things were. So I guess he was, and at the time I was kind of insulted by this, but it was very, very good advice. I mean, he actually said, don't let yourself be a handmaiden to the paleoanthropologists. And, but it was...
Well, that was good advice.
It was good advice, because it meant that I needed to carve out my own projects and be the lead author, because a lot of geologists end up just being
one of the authors.
One of the authors on these long strings, and then that doesn't give you a leadership role.
Okay.
So, because I was doing the intersection of paleo and taphonomy and geology, I kind of had my own thing anyway, my own agenda, and I just had to then work on making the time for that versus helping other people with their geological questions.
And the next question is, what advice do you wish you had been given?
I wish that I had more coaching about how to deal with co-authors and the ethics of collaboration.
It's a very...
And I know you have made an effort, and I'm so glad you have at GW. I didn't really have that. I saw people who were at odds with each other and the feuds and things, and didn't really understand what was going on. And then, of course, I was a young woman who could be taken advantage of in terms of, this handmaiden issue that, we'd like you to help with this, and you can be, in the authorship. And so how do you stand up for yourself and not offend people? And I'll tell one story. Andrew Hill was another really important influence on my early career, and I wish he were still with us so much. And we had a good working relationship, but we organized the conference on taphonomy at Berg-Wartenstein together, and then after that...
And you were quite young people to be doing that.
Well, we were encouraged by Lita Osmondson and, supported, so we brought together, and David Western was there, and Bill Bishop, and all these wonderful people. And then the book was supposed to come out of that. And so Andrew initially was the lead author on that book. And we all had chapters in it. But he just wasn't getting on with the authorship. And so I think we were in Kenya. I'm not sure where we were. And we were walking and talking. And, I just said, Andrew, I'm doing all the work on this editing. I think I should, be the lead author on it. And it took a lot of courage for me to say that, because I didn't necessarily want him to feel, offended by it. He took it really well. I know, there are probably other things that he was not happy about in terms of our sharing of work, but he did. So, and then I got it done. It came out. I mean, Andrew was a wonderful idea source and starter of things, and not so good at
actually
bringing them to completion. Or he would just...
No, he was very generous with...
and he was generous with his time, and so... Anyway, whatever. But, that was a big thing for me. But with other co-authors, I've made mistakes that were not so...
Not so.
And resonated through, and if I'd been... the weathering paper in Amboseli, I should have had co-authors on that, and I just, I wrote it up, submitted it.
I know. It's very easy to do, because you just, you're sort of mono, you're just, you have sort of tunnel vision about the research, because unless you do, it's not going to get done.
Yeah, but now, I learned some lessons, and now, fortunately, I'm at a stage in my career where it isn't quite so important.
Yes. And so, how do you think things are different in human evolution-related research now compared to when you got involved in it?
Well, we know so much more. We have so many more fossils. And the questions in those days were, the origin of Homo. Where did it come from? When? And when did early humans, hominins, start using artifacts, stone tools? They were very basic questions. When did this happen? And where did it happen? And who was doing it? And now we've built up a body of knowledge that is telling us much more about that. And the questions become more about process. I guess we've got a huge array of facts now. Not all of them as reliable as others, but the dating.
And the question is, what do they mean?
Yeah, what do they mean in terms of the forces that shaped this evolutionary trajectory of the early hominins? Why did some things go extinct? Why did some things continue? Where were they living? And how did they interact with each other when there were multiple species? And with the rest of the fauna? And the whole issue of hunting versus scavenging, and ability to move around.
But so that's the research questions. But in terms of a career path, do you think it looks very different now than when you started?
I think so. The technology has given us many more tools to use, and so you can ask different questions, and it's actually probably more complicated for individuals coming into paleoanthropology about what segment of this blossoming tree of knowledge should I carve out for myself and to find out more. And I know that there are not enough people who actually do what I've done and study the sediments, the rocks, the paleo environments, and then try to fit things into them. because a lot of the people who come into paleoanthropology now are coming up through anatomy programs, or they're coming up through biology programs. So maybe it's harder to do that sort of thing now from a geological background than it was for me.
But do you think there are, I mean, you know, you took this sort of taphonomy, which is a whole big, you know, sort of basket of stuff. Do you think there are the equivalents of that which sort of people are just not seeing?
I think one big area could be modeling.
Modeling.
Yes,
Yeah.
the quantitative minds and the capabilities that are available now. I think they're actually doing some of this in Helsinki. The now people that you take some of these variables that you know are important, and some of the facts, like they're taking hypsodonty of teeth and looking at that as a measure of environmental change, and then trying to fit that into what's happening with evolution in general, but also human evolution.
Okay.
But modeling more the forces, like if you allow hominins to be very mobile after not being mobile, and where are they going to go? Are they going to go up the Rift Valley? Or are they going to go from spring to spring, water source to water source? How far can they go? I mean,
do you think they were constrained by the Rift Valley?
I think they used it as a corridor, but they probably weren't constrained to it. But that's a question.
Yeah,
you know,
I mean, it seems to me to be
the topography, the different environments. I've always thought that it's a smorgasbord of different opportunities. So if it's too hot in the Rift Valley,
you can go up.
Yeah,
Okay.
but if you're in the middle of the Congo, or one of these,
you can't.
No, there's very little variability. So
the topography offered them a sort of, it's like people in DC having a summer cottage in Bethesda. You could, okay. My suggestion is that we break.
Oh, that'd be good.
So, just to go back to your research, what I know pride is one of the deadly sins, but which of your research achievements are you most proud of, or would you like to tell your parents about?
Actually, there are two ways to answer that. The research that I have generated, but also the research that I've facilitated.
Right.
And I'm a kind of team person, or I've discovered that I was. And so, and also watching Glenn Isaac with his wonderful ways of bringing people together. So I'll first answer about my own research. I think I'm most proud of my PhD dissertation at East Turkana, and because it really was the proof of concept that geology and paleontology and human evolution, all of this to tell a story together. And the sampling methods that I developed there I'm still telling people about. This is the way to get an unbiased collection of fossils, and then you can, at least you're not using collecting biases in your analysis. You can eliminate that, and you can see what was really on the ground, and then maybe inside the rocks as well. So it was an early accomplishment, and there've been many others with other people, but that one I really did on my own.
Okay, I mean that's it. It goes back a long way, but it was on your own.
It was with, of course, mentoring from.
Sure,
but yes, and I had to forge ahead in spite of people who didn't necessarily believe that it was going to lead to anything.
Okay.
And at the time, there was evidence from the marine world that lithofacies, rocks, with particular characteristics, had assemblages of fossils that meant something ecologically, but that was not known for land vertebrates, and with any certainty. So, and also I should mention Bob Brain as an influence, because he was working in South Africa, but very strong on taphonomy and showing what you could do with the cave faunas there and the approach.
Yes, I mean, sort of he pulled the rug out of the osteodonto-keratic culture, but in a very quiet, sort of
gentle
way
and supportive way. Yeah. But talk about someone who was inquisitive and curious and driven by a really wonderful mind.
Yes. So, if there was a fire and you could only rescue one of your papers or one of the edited books, which would it be?
Oh, well, then the other part of my answer would be the ETE book.
Because of bringing together all these people.
Yes, bringing together. And this was a big
An ETE,
vision.
Could you just explain?
Yeah. Evolution of Terrestrial Ecosystems program started in 1987 with a conference, which I organized along with other people here. And that led to a book about paleoecology, and it's actually up here, Terrestrial Ecosystems Through Time. And I'm the lead editor, but it was a real team effort, and that was alphabetical, actually.
Right.
But no, I did pull it together, and I was responsible for the final publication, but it had to be a team effort, and it was to establish terrestrial paleoecology for plants and animals. And there's a chapter on the later part of the record, including humans with Rick Potts. But it was the whole sweep of time of land ecosystems and what you could do with the data, combining geology and taphonomy and the different kinds of organisms and where they occur. And so it was a major compilation that had never been done before. And I would like that book to actually be redone now that it was 1992 and it's a long time since then. But it's still in print, I think. You can still get it, or at least, maybe used copies. But the University of Chicago Press has been wonderfully supportive of that sort of thing. And
What do you think that the role of editors in university press is? You say the University of Chicago Press has been wonderfully supportive. My sense is that these people can play a more important role than we give them credit for.
I think, definitely then. Those editors were very encouraging and patient. Currently I'm dealing, not directly, but our Sawalik Pakistan volume, it's Johns Hopkins University Press. And I think their major role now is patience, and determination that this is going to see the light of day, because it's so hard to get things out. But I hope these kinds of books, these monographs, will be valued in the future and continue, because nowhere else can you pull together so much information and then make sense of it for the future.
So can I ask you, which researchers of the past or the present do you particularly admire and why? I mean, you've talked about the people that influenced your career. Are there other people who you look at and you think, this is a sort of a class act?
Well, Richard Hay, geologist at Olduvai, one of the few people that that could work with Lewis and Mary Leakey as a geologist, because they were constantly not liking what the geologists had to say. But Dick Hay was a wonderful character and also supportive of my work. We talked a lot about it, and he ended up at Arizona in his retirement years, which was one of the appeals of Arizona. Just a great geologist who was not going to give any ground to when the paleoanthropologists didn't want something
yes,
to be true.
Right. Right.
And yeah.
But it struck me, the advice from the sedimentologist, you shouldn't be a handmaiden of the paleoanthropologist. It seems that one of the things you've done is made the geology and, the context, it's almost an equal partner in this. In other words, this is not just, we want to know, it's, right. Unless you understand this, you can't really understand that.
Mm-hmm. Well, if that's gotten across, then I feel very good about my contribution, that the context, the paleo environments that these hominins and so many other living beings use. I mean, and that's ETE as well. The evolution of terrestrial ecosystems it's the stage. The stage is evolving as well as the characters on it.
Yes,
and they're influencing each other through time. And
I don't think people have really taken that sort of dynamic relationship into account. They think that there is a set for the play, and there's this act, and then another one comes on.
Yes, well, if you're focused on the phylogeny, the origins of your species, and I mean, I can see that, and a lot of people in the museum are very much on that track, and it's a wonderful thing to figure out now with DNA, molecular systematics, and all the tools they have for that. But we're also finding out much more about the environment, and I've been reading up on the microbiomes, not only within us but all around us, and how maybe the stage is actually influencing more of the characters than we might have thought, with viruses, various kinds of ways that genetic material can actually be altered. So, I mean, it's not saying that is a fact yet, but I think we should be open to more than just the pressures of climate and the physical environment as influences on evolution.
Yes, I've not been successful in persuading a graduate student to be interested in the influence of disease on human evolution, because we tend to think the only thing that's keeping these people back is, are they eating the right things, and are they traveling around the right way? But I mean, there must have been so many small populations that were snuffed out by one disease or another, and
well, one of the questions is about books. I read a book called Plagues and Peoples a long time ago, which was just about that kind of, and just opened my eyes to the influence, and this was mainly European, of course, and the plague, but it was a real eye-opener. And I must say, COVID time has given me more opportunity to read widely about plants and the whole microbiome system and plant roots and mycorrhizae and the connections among organisms that I never had formal training in. So,
no.
But
I don't think any of us, I mean, there is the formal training aspect, I think, is interesting. What have you done since, and how have you sort of gone about your own education? I mean, how have you done that? I mean, you work in a museum, which is, in a sense, it's a sort of, an adult education paradise.
It is.
But how have you gone about that?
Talking to people. I mean, just and creating these groups, or helping to facilitate these groups or conferences and workshops, and even informally and Friday gatherings, and where you don't just, you talk about all kinds of things, but you can zero in on some particular problems. Like I remember one time wondering about nematodes and going to what used to be our Friday afternoon museum gathering and asking someone who knew about nematodes.
You could get the answer.
And you could get the answer,
yeah.
and also a lot of humor and other people coming around and giving their 2 cents. And,
right.
And the museum is a wonderful place, but you can learn something from anyone if you ask the right questions or just let them talk. And so that's and then if they say, well, you should read this, or, here's this paper. I don't have the time to keep up with all of them, but the inspiration just keeps going, and the longer my career, the more people there are like that. And so I can just type an email like I did yesterday. What about tragulids? Right. These little artiodactyls that have this shield over the back of their hips. Like,
yes.
Do we have any fossil shields from the Sewolics? This came up because a pre-doc was asking the questions. And so it just keeps rolling along. And that's why I don't ever want to retire, because it's so stimulating to just be here and interact with the people that come in and now are coming back after COVID.
Okay, let me get back to the questions. Is there a paper by another author that you wish you had written?
The answer to that is no. And I thought about it when you gave me the questions, because I guess I've never envied or wished to be someone else. I'm happy to have carved out my own part of science and respect the fact that other people have come at these many wonderful papers that they've written from theirs. And so I really, that's a foreign kind of feeling, question.
That's a fair response. Okay. And then, if you had the scientific equivalent of a fairy godmother or a fairy godfather who promised to answer one research question, what would the question be?
Well, if it's about human evolution, I guess we could go back to the question of how topography and rift valleys and different continental configurations on a very large scale have contributed to human evolution.
Okay.
And, compare Africa with South America.
Yeah.
And there are mountains there, but there's no rift valley. And there are huge plains with lots of productivity and primates that got over there, and none of them ever ended up walking, on 2 legs. So, there are comparisons at a large scale that would be really, really fun to have a fairy godmother.
Norman Owen Smith, have you read his recent book? He sort of tries to address that.
Oh, yeah?
Essentially, why Africa? There is savannas in other places and that sort of thing. Okay.
Well, that's the one that comes to mind.
Okay.
And I did try to think about this before. But so it's more of the mega,
okay.
It's the macroevolutionary, which...
But it's also process again.
Yes, it is process. It is process.
Yes.
Yeah. And what's driving... it's not one thing driving human evolution or any evolution. It's a combination of connected things that it's pretty complicated to figure out. And there's a human tendency to want, one clear explanation. And in some cases, it probably works that there's one major driver. But then that's going to change for another species or another context. Right. So it's going to be a hard thing to characterize. But I resist trying to find one explanation.
Yeah, I think that, who said, that there is, somebody comes up with a simple answer to a complex problem, you can be racingly certain it's wrong.
Yeah. Yes.
So you've talked about the importance of this institution in your career. Are there any societies that you've belonged to that have contributed to your career, or have you made your own little sort of societies, the Now Group and the ETE and that sort of thing?
The professional societies,
yeah.
I think the Paleoanthropology Society has been a really good constant for me, a connector to that community, because I'm not only part of that community, I'm part of paleontology community. So I always go to the Society of Vertebrate Paleontology meetings.
Okay.
And that's...
Why do you make a point of doing that?
Well, it's the crossroads of all kinds of paleontologists and paleoecology, and taphonomy has become a much more common topic of presentations and posters. It's just grown as I've grown, and then the community has grown, and there are paleoanthropology symposia and all that go on there as well. Okay. So, and Andrew Hill, for instance, used to go. Yeah. So it's more of a crossroads, and it's the right size. It's like 1,000, 1,200 people at a time, and that's a good thing about the Paleoanthropology Society too. It's smaller. And the Geological Society of America, I also try to go to, and that is a connector with more of the broad community of sedimentologists and also geologists who are pursuing really interesting research in relation to human evolution. There's symposia there too. So there's a presence, but it's a very, very big meeting. And that's it. So other societies, just local ones. I mean, anything that puts me in contact with people without overloading my system, which tends to happen, is good and has helped.
You've been relatively recently elected to the National Academy of Sciences. Do you think there is anything about that which will help your research, or is it, other than the well-deserved recognition?
Thank you. Yes, it's a wonderful honor. I've discovered that they also expect you to step up and do some work for them.
Okay.
And so the first couple years, I was asked to do a lot of editorial work,
right,
which was interesting and time-consuming, and that now seems to have subsided a bit. There are many committees that I could participate in. I think a lot of that will have to wait until I do retire, or that I have less on my plate otherwise. But I it's a nice organization to belong to because it represents our science to the world. I mean, it's really important, and there are many dedicated members. But so far, I just haven't. I mean, it was just 2020.
I know. And sort of COVID and everything.
And so I'm aware of the fact that I would have lots of opportunities to have more, for instance, political clout or consequence of paleontology, because there aren't very many paleontologists there, and paleoanthropology as well. So it'll be interesting when you interview like Gene Altman or people who have been in the academy longer that ask that question of them.
Could I ask you, you've mentioned editing quite a lot. Where and how did you learn to do that?
Oh, I had really good English language training, and my mother was very into that as well. So from the beginning, the way you put words together was
mattered.
Yeah, it was important, and so I'm sure it helped me along. But the real editing training came when I had to read the script over and over and over for first the Mammal Hall here, and then the Deep Time Fossil Hall, which just opened in 2019.
Okay.
And the efficiency of words that have to communicate to the public.
Every word counts.
Every word counts, but also how you shape the sentences and how you take out, fluff. And
if in doubt, cut it out.
Right, and so it became very reflexive, and now I'm using it on things that I'm reading, and on my own. I tend to write too much to start with, and then just pare it down, but the editing was through experience. And
there wasn't anybody in particular who edited your work and that you sort of...
Well, Brian Patterson. Was very good at that too.
Okay.
And in spite of, it must have been his homeschooling from his mother.
Okay. So if somebody gave you the equivalent of $5 million to spend on research, how would you spend it?
I would put together a team of people like the ETE group, an extension of that on a bigger scale, to use all the technological capabilities now to explore this connection between environment and evolution in a lot more depth at a continental scale too. That is across scales, and that's one thing I've been really interested in and trying to push throughout my career. You take the small scale, and that's the trees, and then you scale up to the forest, and then a group of forests, and there are things happening at different scales that may or may not relate to what's happening above or below in the scale. So it would be a scale-oriented kind of research.
Scale-oriented research, continental, but macro.
Well, but also paying attention to
how that relates.
The micro. How do you take what's happening in the Turkana Basin, in the processes that you can reveal there, and scale those up to what's happening on a regional or a continental scale.
So it's a form of uniformitarianism, but it's sort of adjusted uniformitarianism.
I mean, the past was different, so I don't use uniform. I mean, of course, you have to, because you refer to the modern, and in Amboseli, my study there is all modern. But as soon as you start looking at the fossil record, you realize that things were different.
The past was another place.
Yeah, it was another planet sometimes.
Yeah, right.
In a way. So you have to leave yourself open to that. So, and I talked about modeling earlier. If I could assemble a dream team with this $5 million, and we've talked something about this in ETE, but we didn't have the funds to go on. Just looking at how different scales relate to each other today, but also how much of that can you see and detect in the fossil record? Okay.
The next question is that if you could invite 5 researchers, alive or dead, to spend time with, who would they be and why?
Well, I've named some of them. I would just love to bring Glenn Isaac back, and as you, I know, would, just to talk to him. He would be so excited about what is going on now, and so there's one, and it would be really fun to talk to Mary Leakey as well about what's going on now. I wonder what it would be like to talk to Charles Darwin.
I don't know.
He was not maybe so communicative, but some of his observations about taphonomic issues and what he saw in South America, and also his take on the connectedness. If you could tell him about DNA, and you could tell him about all the ways that microbes influence each other and intergress in terms of the genetic system, and then say, well, what do you think about evolution now, given all that? It would be fun.
Okay, so that's 3.
That's 3. I've gotten a huge amount out of talking and bouncing things off David Pilbeam through the years.
Yes, I think you and I both.
Yeah. He is just such a wise and perceptive person who keeps up somehow with the literature.
Amazingly, with the,
He's always sending articles that he's come across.
He's read this paper, he's plotted out the data, and I think, wow.
Yeah. But I'm fortunate I do get to see him, frequently, at least on Zoom. Mikhail Fortelius in Helsinki has been, and he's still a very, and will be for a long time, I think, wonderful person to bounce ideas off of, and very generous with his time and his ability to think broadly.
And what do you think these people have in common? That they are generous? I mean, they're all smart.
They will listen and take an idea that I might have and amplify it in a way that makes me feel good about it, but also that they will add something to it.
Okay, so they will,
and then I can appreciate that, and so it's like a back and forth building of understanding, and it's just.
I think some people have that.
Yeah, and it's just makes it really fun to spend time with them and wish for more, and yeah. So,
can I ask you what part of your work life do you most enjoy?
Talking to my colleagues,
right,
and when I actually have time to sit down with my data and think about it and analyze it and groom it. I haven't been able to do that, but and doing figures too, which I'm doing for this book, putting together things visually. Because remember, I was an art major to start with, and I really enjoy and spend too much time on Adobe Illustrator, or putting together figures to communicate visually.
I don't know where it is, but there is an image you put together about the role of taphonomy, that you go from the biosphere to the lithosphere, and then you go through the. I mean, it's so effective, and the few times that you and I have collaborated, it's the figure that if it can't be shown in a pretty simple figure, then there's probably something wrong with your idea.
Well, just transforming the words into something visual can be a really big challenge.
Sure.
And I realize my way of dealing with the world is a more visual one anyway. So I've come to understand that it's not that. It's even harder for a lot of other people.
Yeah, because I now realize that you have a head start on the rest of us. Okay.
Well, but it's something that can be learned too. Also, just drawing. I mean, I spent a month drawing bones to learn what the shapes and the bumps were, and before going to Amboseli.
Okay.
First time.
A lot of people wouldn't have done that. Yeah. Okay. So, what part of your work life would you most like to be rid of?
I guess the pressure of conforming to the rules here in the museum regarding, it's kind of bureaucratic side of it. We all have to deal with that. It's gotten more onerous through time. Not the performance reviews and that sort of thing, but just the bureaucracy relating to collections and visitors lately, and just
rigidity.
Well, it's just that unfortunately the Smithsonian is a federal institution and has to conform to that, but we don't fit neatly what we do.
Right.
The scientists the collection staff. And so the job descriptions, which come down in a format from the government, then have to be negotiated
Right.
so they actually fit us. And when you
Right.
get into that and doing contracts, which I had to do, go through that bureaucracy.
With the exhibits.
No, this was for a research assistant.
Okay.
But that part, it takes a huge amount of time, and
Okay.
you just have to plow through it. It's not
Okay.
fun, and then you realize that you didn't do it right, and by somebody's criteria, and you have to redo it. But we keep going anyway.
Okay.
So it's just right. Every place has its.
Yes, every place has its downside. So how do you spend time when you're not working?
My daughters have been asking me for more of my time, and wondering if I do anything but work. I love walking, and I've been doing during COVID just walking around the neighborhood, walking. I walk partly to work and home, so I'm not, and I'm thinking, but
yes, I think
I'm observing.
I think walking and and being on your own and being able to think, it's a very important part of the day.
I go home with Bill, my husband. We have a show that we like to watch after dinner.
Right.
I like to cook. I do the cooking in the house, and an awful lot lately has been like quick frozen dinners, but from good places. So it's not TV dinners, but we don't spend a lot of time watching shows, but we do. I mean, that's a total escape. And reading. I mean, I've been saying that. I just read very widely.
You read a lot.
Not just science. I mean, novels, mysteries, anything I can.
Okay.
And I do it on my phone now more than anything. So it's like, I just go through books like crazy.
Okay. Okay. But there's no, you don't collect.
The writing, the personal writing, I don't collect things right now. In fact, we're trying to get rid of things.
Yes.
But at this stage in our lives, but if I had more time, I used to do a lot of watercolors, and I make feather mobiles, which seems like a really good thing to do with feathers, and so I've been collecting them for.
Because you're always in places where there are.
Yeah. So this coming weekend, I have to make a feather mobile to go over the crib of my younger grandson.
Oh.
So
yeah. Okay.
So, but my husband and my daughters would say that I'm kind of boring in terms of if I can't talk about work, what do I talk about?
Okay. Well, let's move on. So if the career that you have explained to us had not been available to you, what would you have done instead?
I probably would have gone into art, design, and maybe scientific illustration, actually. And that's the non-science answer. But if I hadn't gotten the job here, or if I hadn't gone to Kenya, I think I would have had a career in geology. And
as a geologist?
As a geologist.
Okay.
A sedimentologist more, and maybe with an oil company, who knows.
Okay.
But I always wanted to get back to doing art. Now I feel almost afraid to even try because I'm so rusty.
Okay.
But I almost always take a sketchbook with me, and then I bring it home without anything more, because I'm just so wrapped up in the science.
So what role does your research play in sort of society at large? I mean, do you think you have a responsibility to explain what you do? Do you think what you do is important beyond solving these scientific problems, although I don't think we solve anything. I just think we reduce our ignorance about things.
Nothing's ever solved completely, right? But it's pretty clear that the public needs to know more about how climate influences the environment, how climate influences behavior and evolution. And so a lot of what I've learned actually in my career, I've been able to translate to our new hall.
Right.
And the importance of taphonomy actually has forensic applications as well. So that's kind of an easy one to explain to people, being able to distinguish what happened to bones. So to solve crimes and problems like that. I haven't gotten into that very much, but the whole way that evolution is influenced by environment as a basic understanding the public needs in order to chart the future for the planet and comprehend what's happening. So it's all intertwined with what other people in my department, the scientists and the exhibit people, provided for that exhibit. But
right.
I feel that it has really justified and helped the public, justified what I've done and the investment that the public has made in me.
Sure, sure.
All the way through. I mean,
sure.
Thank goodness, we're still, the Smithsonian is supported and the universities are supported so that science can continue to grow. And there's so many of us that are part of that, and now we're mentoring people that we want to continue that, and we're including communicating better to the public as well. So if you're studying hadrosaurs and how they chew, why is that important to the public? Hadrosaurs being a dinosaur, that's one of our postdocs, and so it's her challenge to take that out and interest people, and even if it's just getting them interested in a puzzle,
right,
which is a scientific puzzle. Right. That they can gather more information, right, maybe even themselves, to help solve. Just that basic scientific approach, and not making it scary, making it fun, making it enabling and many, many people to realize they too can be scientists.
So we're back to process.
I guess we are. You've noticed.
So we're at the end of the questions, but is there anything that you would like to add to this oral history that we haven't covered? And also, thank you for being such a good sport.
Well, thank you for all the good questions. It's been a lot of fun. I guess I will return to my formative years and my mother, who, with my aunts, and I had two wonderful aunts who were my father's sisters after he passed away. They were a great support system. They lived 6 blocks from us. They actually were both teachers, and I went to first grade with one and second grade with the other. Education was big in our family. But my mother was determined that I would not be derailed by anything so that I could achieve my potential. And I don't even remember how she managed to get me into college. Right. I mean, there were some resources, but she had to manage the finances, and she invested too. But I just was never aware of that as a teenager.
Right.
And then you're going to Monticello, and then, well, let's go to Washington University, and right, and so up to the point where I applied for graduate school, she was the one that made things happen. She did, and never complained or really let me know what was going on. Also, I went to summer school at University of Wisconsin and University of Colorado. I mean, she just seized every opportunity to improve my education. And my brothers, she managed to get both of them through college too. But I think because of her motivation and her vision for me. You know, I owe her the most fundamental contributions to my career. And she lived long enough to, and she never came to Kenya, but you know, she was always really interested in what I was doing, and never wanted to take much credit for it, but that was just kind of her personality.
But she deserves a lot.
She does, definitely. And my brothers also, you know, they came along on a number of expeditions with me as well.
Okay.
And continue to be really interested in what I'm doing. And
okay, well, Kay Behrensmeyer, thank you very much.